Well, if Enoch's ready, then so am I. And so, welcome to Term Two's Raw Sport Weekly, and we are back programming for the next 10 weeks or so, 9 weeks or so. Who knows? We'll see how it goes, and we may have sport to talk about. We may not have sport to talk about. We really don't know what's going on, but thank you for watching along, and hope you had also. First of all, I should say Happy New Year to those who are watching. Hope you've had a great sort of festive break, and hope if you're a Warwick student, hopefully you're recharged and sort of got your head around all the the new term two as we know it, and hope you're settled in. And this is the good thing about. I mean, we will be streaming from home again, as you can tell, and hopefully, talking about sport as sport is meant to provide an escape. Hopefully, talking about sport as it sort of provides a bit of an escape from the world. And if you're watching and you want to know how to join the panel and kind of talk about whether it's football, whether it's cricket, as we're going to go on to in just a bit, Formula One, whatever sport you have a passion for, basketball, NFL, AFL, whatever, then you can join our Raw Sport group page, which is in the video description below. Obviously, Warwick students only, not randoms, but feel free to join the panel and get involved, especially during this weird time where obviously most of us are at home and you sort of miss being able to talk sports with your friends and flatmates and whoever at uni. This is a pretty cool thing. So yeah. As well as that, yes, video description below also has social media clips. And of course, regular viewers will know Saturday we have the Quarren stream from 3 p.m. on Saturday till 5, talking about, again, whatever football we get that plays out on the weekend. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation of games getting reshuffled, postponed, maybe even, moved back for weeks. So we will discuss that. We will discuss sort of some of the Christmas action, obviously try and look forward to whatever January action we get as well. So, but that's for Saturday. We're going to talk about, as the title suggests, we are going to talk about the Formula One calendar for 2021, which has been reshuffled a little bit, and some new additions, some welcome additions from last year, I would add, and a few Grand Prix of us have sort of seen a reshuffle in their position. But first, we're going to talk cricket, and to do so, I am going to bring on our, de facto our cricket expert, Cam Hall, because as far as we know, and if any other cricket experts are watching, you can join us as well. But to my knowledge, I just have Cam Hall to talk cricket with. So Cam, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing absolutely fantastic. It's great to be. It's great. The things you don't get in Leamington is my cat joining in the shot sometimes. Great. No, it's great. Fantastic. As you said, Happy New Year, or as happy as I guess that this year can be. It's not been a great start so far, but hey ho, I think sport is one of the few things I think keeping me and many people through this period at the moment, definitely.
Yeah, that is true, I guess, with the, and, we've lost sort of movie theaters aren't sort of a thing in that at the moment, and, going around the shops and all that stuff, with all these kind of various avenues gone, I guess sport has sort of taken on the lone baton at the moment, and become what we watch on screen. And indeed, I mean, it is the winter, and normally, we don't really expect to see a lot of cricket during the winter, but we have, starting tomorrow, the England Sri Lanka Test series coming up. Starts tomorrow. You must be excited to see plenty of cricket on the screen, considering that last summer, and as it looks like maybe this summer as well, was quite fragmented with the amount of cricket we got. With the exception of the biodomes with the England and West Indies series.
I think just have any cricket on at the moment, or any sport on, is fantastic. And it's a fantastic series. I think Sri Lanka is one of the most difficult places I think you can tour, especially if you're England. But I think this is the start. I was reading earlier that this is the start of a real big year for English cricket. That a lot of it's obviously building up to the Ashes next winter, and we're going to be spending a lot of this year trying to find the players and get the right balance for that team. But there's a lot of difficult series in the way. This series in Sri Lanka is one of them. We're going off to India next, which is always a challenge for any side touring in India. England won once recently in 2012, but that's their only recent series victory in a long time. And of course, we have India coming over to England this summer, which is going to be absolutely fantastic to watch. But yeah, starting off with the Sri Lanka series, I think it's a real test for England. And given the circumstances that seem to have been forced upon them, a real opportunity to test out some of those players on the fringes of the main 11, which I think affords the team a real opportunity to blood in that young talent and really see who can stake their claim for that Ashes series.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the schedule. It appears that there's 17 tests coming up for 2021, which is a lot. I mean, when you think about how many series there are, I mean, we're looking at Sri Lanka. You mentioned the India series coming up, and then to have a glimpse further down the calendar, you've got New Zealand coming to England in June. You have, obviously, you mentioned India coming back to the UK in August, and then the Ashes in November to January. So it's a very busy time. And how important is this Sri Lanka series, to kind of get a good start off for the year? And are you worried about any rust at all from these players who, let's face it, haven't experienced Test cricket for a while, for several months at least?
Well, I think, fitness is the main concern this year. I mean, I think it's more in the bowling department, definitely. There are a lot of these England bowlers, these England quicks. Mark Wood, the obvious example from the last few years, are very fantastic cricketers, but they all tend to have real injury problems. They're not the most stable, and you really have to wrap them in cotton wool. We saw Jimmy Anderson, of course, England's greatest ever bowler, ruled out for most of 2019, having just been overloaded. And then obviously losing him in that Ashes series was a big blow for England. So England really need to use their players well over the next 12 months. Having said that, this is a real opportunity to get some momentum going. I think people would normally look at this series as a warm-up series to the bigger tour of India. And of course, it's a big tour to India, and there's no doubt about that. But I think with all of the context of what we lost in 2020 with cricket, and again, as I said in the review show last year, credit to the ECB, Cricket West Indies and Pakistani Cricket Board for getting that series together last summer. But I think we've lost a lot of opportunities to really identify the talent that England need to go to Australia and really mould that team together. So I think every test is important, but I think something that's going to be key is rotation. It's making sure you rest players well, but you always put your best foot forward, and also you play to conditions. I think with this Ashes series, I think there's going to be a lot more variation than normal in the conditions. And you're obviously going to have some pitches that will be bouncy, some pitches that will swing a bit more. Obviously, Adelaide, where you've got the day-nighters. But that's and the point I make with that, obviously, this is a completely different set of conditions. Sri Lanka and India, it's very spin-heavy pitches. It's very turgid to bat on. You've got to really see this series in isolation, but you've also got to see it as building up and really building that rotation policy that you're going to need in Australia to keep all your players fit. So big series definitely to build up for the winter, but also I think for the here and now, with the World Test Championship as well, England still have a chance to make the top two, make that Lord's Test match, I think, next September. So it counts, definitely. It's important for England, this.
Yeah, and you mentioned that this series gives a chance for some players on the fringe to kind of stake their claim in a regular place in the squad. We'll look at looking at it from a batting perspective first of all. Obviously, England are without Ben Stokes. He's being rested. Rory Burns is not involved. Neither is, Ollie Pope did play in the practice game, but he's recovering from shoulder surgery. We don't expect him to play either. Here's the top five that we think will play starts with Dom Sibley, then Zach Crawley, who obviously had an amazing 246 against Pakistan in the last series, Johnny Bairstow, Root, and Dan Lawrence is the new name, the debutant. I rattled those names off. What do you have high expectations for these guys? We'll talk specifically about maybe Dan Lawrence. I do want to know if what your thoughts on him debuting in this series. But as a collective, that five, that's what are your expectations for them?
Well, I think to lose Ben Stokes, I think that's the first thing to take is a huge blow. He is going to be one of England's key players going forward throughout the rest of the year. And for him to not be involved, obviously, again, England understand the need to rest him. He is, without doubt, England's best player in the team at the moment. And I think England will feel it, but I think they know that they can play without Stokes, that there is a real opportunity. And I think here, perhaps where you do need in the subcontinent, it's all about getting runs on the board, maybe more than it is sometimes what Stokes can bring with obviously an ability to bat really quickly and ability to, make things happen with the ball. But if the emphasis here is on the batting, I think it'll be interesting to see. I think England will lose out from not having Ben Stokes, but the people they have aren't bad. Obviously, Crawley and Sibley were two of the breakout stars for England over the summer. Sibley, a very slow scoring opener. I think he's very secure in his style, but I think in the subcontinent where you need people to bat for a long time, maybe more than score runs, that's going to be so important for England. Zach Crawley, someone technically, I think one of England's most promising batsmen coming through. He's got a really nice style. His average is not high, but as we saw in the series against Pakistan, particularly in that game at the GS Bowl where he hit that 267, he's a really high quality technical batsman who knows to play the good balls and leave the bad balls. So I think it'll be interesting to see him playing as an opener, of course, which is his natural position. Johnny Bairstow is his big weakness, of course, is standing too far across the stumps and leaving himself open to getting bowled. Not as much of an issue with spin as it is with pace, so that might work to his advantage. And we could see Johnny Bairstow stake his claim for a spot in that Test team again, because he has kind of fallen out of favour, even if he is one of our best one-day players. Joe Root, as you said, obviously the captain, hasn't had a century in over a year, and I think there are a lot of people starting to question whether the toll of the captaincy is starting to dawn on him now. So he needs to get runs here. He really needs to lead his team from the front, because in the absence of Ben Stokes, you have to turn to Joe Root to get those runs for England. And then Dan Lawrence, one of the best players in county cricket over the last few years. Again, kind of very similar to Zach Crawley, very technical batsman, someone who is very good, but someone who can get runs as well. I think putting him in Sri Lanka, I think arguably all batsmen will want to play their first test at home. It's the conditions they like. So throwing him in almost at the deep end will be an interesting experiment. But I do think, having seen him in the warm-up game, a lot of people talking him up. And it's just great to see that you've mentioned the players that England don't have, but here's who England can call up on. There's such an exciting batting depth that we didn't have even 2 or 3 years ago. And I think it's really going to be interesting to see how Dan Lawrence in particular performs in this test match with regards to that.
Yeah, and it's very exciting to see these sort of, Crawley and Sibley are relatively more inexperienced to the test scenes. It's exciting to see them, continue to kind of carve out that international test career for themselves. But you mentioned Root and Bairstow, and I sort of just want to ask you, those two guys sort of not really in form, have had a bit of a barren spell since for a while in terms of not getting a big score. Bairstow kind of came out recently, said he has nothing to prove on the batting end, and obviously Jos Buttler's the wicket keeper, so he's not there for his wicket keeping, he's there for his batting. And Joe Root, as you mentioned, also hasn't had a big score in a while. So is there pressure on those kind of experienced heads to kind of create a good foundation for England during the series? Or what are we expecting from those two guys? Because they are the ones that are expected to kind of, they sort of know the conditions well and are experienced in Sri Lanka.
The Joe Root's, his pressure is on his captaincy, just because people have said that the batting's taking a toll on his captaincy. So the pressure is definitely more there in that regards. You wouldn't drop Joe Root from your team. Form is temporary, class is permanent. Joe Root has an average just under 50. He is one of England's best batsmen of all time, even if you have this little barren run of form that he's in. But I do think England do need to find a way to get those runs out of him, because when he is on form, Joe Root, he can win you matches. He's won series before for England. He is one of their most crucial players when he's in form. Johnny Bairstow's an interesting one. If I was a selector, I personally would have picked Ben Foakes. I know Ben Foakes and Johnny Bairstow haven't had the best run necessarily recently. But I do think one of the advantage of Ben Foakes, and this is perhaps going back to Jos Buttler in the keeping department, is I actually think Jos Buttler should be playing as a specialist batsman here in Sri Lanka and probably in India as well, and have Ben Foakes playing as well as your full-time keeper, because obviously Ben Foakes the best batsman. But in India and Sri Lanka, especially when you're thinking of the need to take quite low edges, the need for stumpings as well, which really come into play when you're playing in very spin-friendly conditions, Ben Foakes is the far better keeper compared to Bairstow and Buttler. Now, Butler's still a good keeper. I think he justifies himself easily as a keeper ahead of Johnny Bairstow. And in every other condition in the world, you would start Jos Buttler as your keeper. So the pressure is on Johnny Bairstow to play as that specialist batsman. And time again, teams have really rumbled through his technique. As I said, he does leave too much of his stumps on show. He had that problem when he first came into the team 2013-14, and Mitchell Johnson just had fun with his off stump through that entire series. When he came back into the side for that extended run, sort of between 2015 to 2019, that problem seemed to have gone. Then it came back. It's more of a problem against pace, but Sri Lanka do have some very good pace bowlers. I'm thinking particularly the likes of Dasun Shanaka, Nuwan Pradeep as well. There are some really difficult pace bowlers that Johnny Bairstow could be thrown up. And if he's playing at number 3 as well, pace is going to be more of a factor than spin. So Johnny Bairstow has to prove that his technique has got a lot better and he's not showing off as much of his stumps to justify getting back into the England setup.
Yeah, there's certainly eyes on Bairstow to kind of get that big score and kind of cement, as we talk about, cement that kind of place with that hectic schedule to come, and that series in India as well, where, yeah, as we said, spin will play a massive part with the likes of Ashwin spinning the ball as well as he does. From a bowling perspective, let's look at from the other side. Obviously, no Moeen Ali, or we don't expect him to because he tested positive for coronavirus. It's unlikely he'll be ready to play in either tests. Similarly, Chris Woakes, we're not too sure because he was a close contact. He had to isolate soon. We're not sure if he'll be to play. But regardless of that, I mean, Moeen more so, I guess, than Woakes, I guess, because of Sri Lanka's, because of their conditions, it tends to favor spin bowling. Now, there's been a lot of talk of maybe Jack Leach, Dom Bess play together, and maybe even a third spinner. Obviously, Mason Crane's there as well. So what sort of approach would you take with the bowling if you were in charge, if you were an England selector? Would you kind of put more emphasis on spin, or would you keep the likes of Anderson and Broad around experienced guys who know how to get it done in these conditions?
Well, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but last time England were in Sri Lanka, I think it was the vast majority of the 60 wickets that they took the last time they were in Sri Lanka were from the spinners. The spinners in that series, Jack Leach, Adil Rashid and Moeen Ali. And I think at least one of them got a 5 for every test. I think probably 5 for every innings. So that's how important spinners in Sri Lanka. Obviously, I think people might look ahead to India, and India have been preparing, not obviously spin-friendly pitches still, but with their pace attack coming through slightly more seam-friendly conditions on their pitches, whereas in Sri Lanka, they haven't done that. So the big question has to be, do you go 3 spinners playing more to the Sri Lankan conditions, or 2 spinners thinking ahead to India? Obviously, Moeen Ali if Moeen Ali was around, I think England would have gone for 3 spinners, but with him not around, and Amir Virdi, Matt Parkinson and Mason Crane are 3 exciting young players, but their record just doesn't justify them in the team. Amir Virdi, across 2020, 1 fifer across the whole season, not really promising returns. Matt Parkinson hasn't played a first-class game in over a year. Mason Crane, obviously, with a lot of injury problems, but again, no fifers in first-class cricket. Only 1 game, I believe, where he got 1 wicket in both innings. So I think England have to go for the option of 3 seamers and 2 spinners. I think if you're thinking about that seam attack, obviously Broad and Anderson are the 2 players you have to wrap in cotton wool. Both of them have quite clearly, 600 wickets for Jimmy Anderson, over 500 for Stuart Broad. There's a reason they've taken so many wickets in a variety of conditions. They know how to bowl in different conditions. They bring a lot of variety. They bring a lot of pace. They bring a lot of control. England need to keep them in wraps for that Ashes series. So looking ahead, I think this is a real opportunity for England to try some other options. Obviously, Sam Curran, someone I'm a massive fan of, someone who I think is an absolutely fantastic batsman, but brings a real variety with his left-arm swing bowling. I think someone, when we were in Sri Lanka last time, opens the bowling. Now, didn't do well necessarily, or not only didn't do well, but it wasn't most suited to that. So it'll be interesting to see whether England deploy him there again. I think England would also get a lot of benefit from trying out potentially their pace bowlers. Obviously, Chris Woakes won't be playing the first Test match. We've lost him because he's in isolation. So Ollie Stone and Mark Wood, again, two players who England are going to need in Australia, alongside obviously Jofra Archer, who isn't playing in this series as well. This is a real chance for them to stake their claim. Mark Wood is someone who has played many Test matches, but again, someone who you do need to wrap in cotton wool because he is very injury prone. Ollie Stone, we haven't seen a lot of, but his form for Warwickshire has been incredible over the last few years. He can bowl, like with Mark Wood, over 90 mile an hour consistently. I think a lot of it will come down to the pace. I think having on these turgid wickets that you could get in Asia, I think just having that little bit of extra pace might give England an advantage. But I think there's also an advantage in playing Curran and having that batting depth as well. Don Best and Jack Leach are two good spinners, definitely on that point. But the batting depth doesn't go that well if you have Best at 7. You then go down to Broad at 8. So Mark Wood at 9, Anderson 10, Leach 11. The batting depth isn't there. So I think if England want a longer tail, I think it's worth playing Sam Curran. I think if England are willing to sacrifice the tail and play Ollie Stone or Mark Wood, I think they go ahead with that. I think England also should be prepared to rotate Anderson and Broad around. I know they don't like it. They like to play every Test match that they're in, but it's a real opportunity for England to test out their bowlers and also keep Anderson and Broad back in conditions that don't necessarily favour them the most. If I was a selector thinking about this Test match, I think certainly just thinking about the momentum, I might say Broad. I'd probably go for Jimmy Anderson, and I'd probably say Sam Curran. Although for the second and the third Test, I would want to see one of Mark Wood or Ollie Stone playing in those games.
Yeah, it's an interesting decision, I guess, for the selectors. Obviously, of where do they put their eggs in their basket, and in whose basket do they put their eggs in? So it should be interesting stuff. Prediction. I mean, it's a 2-test series, so it could end up being a drawn series. But I'm assuming you're backing England to win both games in Sri Lanka.
I would like to think that. I mean, the Sri Lankan side is very strong. Even though they've lost Sangakkara and Jai Warner in recent years, they still have some fantastic batsmen in that team. Kusal Pereira, Angelo Matthews, Dinesh Chandimal. Their bowling attack obviously is missing Rangana Herath. That's the big difference from 2 years ago, which is a huge loss for Sri Lanka. So I'm going to go for a 1-1. Sri Lanka is a very difficult place to play in. I think I would say Sri Lanka may edge the first one very closely. England to come back in the second. That tends to be the way that things work at the moment. But I certainly don't see England losing this series. I feel it's an optimistic prediction, but I don't see England losing this series. Of course, I could be totally wrong when we start seeing the play, and obviously if England's batsmen are struggling against spin, but I don't see them losing it.
This is the beauty of sports predictions. You can easily be wrong, as you know, as our next guest knows very well, and I know very well. You put yourself out there, and then you wait and see what happens after that. Just quickly before we turn our attention to another sport, we talked about India. Obviously, they're coming up next. They're currently in action against Australia at the moment. A very interesting series at the moment. Obviously, the first Test, Australia dominated from start to finish. Then you sort of had the opposite in Melbourne. The Indian team kind of took back, wrestled to control the series back towards them and the momentum. And now we're currently, it's the third Test at the moment, isn't it? We're currently sort of, the tie is sort of evenly sort of poised, and actually, no, it was a draw, wasn't it? It was a draw, and a lot of talk about, the captaincy of Tim Payne on the Australian end, and obviously there were a few. There was some people alleging that Steve Smith may or may not have influenced gameplay in a illegitimate fashion, shall we say? But an interesting series, and I mean, have you been watching it? What have you kind of taken away from it with regard to? And obviously, as an England fan, what can you take away from it?
I guess really it's a look into the next two opponents. I mean, Australia-India as a series always gives you loads of great moments. Of course, we had Homework Gate only a few years ago. we've now got this controversy over sledging, over Steve Smith scuffing up the pitch. It's so much that this series always brings. But I think in regards to this series in particular, I think starting off with Australia, starting off with the big talk on Steve Smith and the scuffing of the pitch. I've watched it a few times now. Steve Smith is a very idiosyncratic batsman. He's a very idiosyncratic person. He has these weird tendencies. It's what makes him Steve Smith. I'm not entirely sure if it was deliberate or not. I'm not really sure I can make a judgment either way. I think it's a very technical bit of the rules that are very difficult to prove. Basically, if you are aware of what it is, basically Steve Smith was walking down the side of the pitch. He motioned almost to move his foot out and scuffed effectively a bit of the pitch that would have basically stopped the spin bowlers being able to mark their foot and being able to bowl sort of perfect line deliveries. The thing for that really with Smith is that obviously it's a tendency he has. He has all these weird quirks. It's not been brought up before. I think clearly the Indian batsman, I don't think, liked it. Of course, this was a very high stakes chase for the Indian batsman that they eventually managed to see out. So I think I'm not sure whether I can make a judgment either way. I'm not the most sort of technical and adept with the rules there, but I do think there has to be more clarity, and I do think there has to, perhaps if you can urge Steve Smith to make his behaviour look slightly less suspicious. I think Sandpapergate, has clouded a lot of Steve Smith's reputation, and now anything that he does like this could automatically be assumed as cheating because of Sandpapergate. But I think certainly as looking at the two teams, India, that second innings from India, I think was the best I've seen them in a long time. Rishabh Pant is one of the most exciting young players of this generation. I would go as far to say probably the best wicketkeeper batsman since Adam Gilchrist. Just the fluency that he has when he plays. He knows when to sort of turn the tempo down and when to turn the tempo up. He's a good keeper as well. And again, why they didn't play him in that first Test match, India, I'll never know. I've seen weirdly a lot of criticism of Cheshire Pujara at number 3 for his very slow, stoic innings. But almost that was the glue that allowed Rishabh Pant to go forward. Sure, his scoring rate is not that high, but you don't get a high scoring rate with Pujara, but you get someone who sits in and scores runs, which is exactly the problem that England will have in India. If Pujara is in form, it's going to be very, very difficult to dislodge him. Apart from that, I think it's very interesting to see sort of how that team is shaping up, because I think there's a lot of questions as to what India team comes out in a few weeks' time. Obviously, Virat Kohli will be back in that middle order. You can imagine, obviously, Pujara, Kohli, Rahane in that middle order. I think there's a lot of questions about the seam attack. Obviously, Jasprit Bumrah has been playing over here. There's question marks. Obviously, we haven't seen Mohammad Shami about for some time with Neshwar Kumar. Saini and Sinaj, I haven't really seen a lot of them, but from what I have seen, they were bowling very well in this series. And again, obviously, the spinners as well. Ravi Ashwin and Ravi Jadeja, I mean, two of the best spin bowlers of this time, perhaps of all time as well. Ashwin hasn't been on the best form recently, but, there's a reason he has over 400 wickets in Test match cricket. And if he's not in form and Jadeja is in the form he's in, that's going to be difficult for England. And just one last thing quickly on Australia, obviously, seeing Australia playing them this winter, the bowling attack is as fresh as ever. Stark, Hazelwood, Cummins and Lyon. It's been the downfall. This bowling attack has been the downfall of England in the last 2 Ashes series. I fear it's going to be the downfall of England again. Cameron Green, I think a very exciting young player from what we've seen so far. I think this was his best Test match as well. Will Pukowski as well. Perennially an injured nearly man, gets his opportunity and then gets injured on day 5. But again, his innings in this Test match, that first innings that Pukowski played, was a really fluent, a really nice innings to watch. And I think someone who really has a real place in that team. But yeah, this Australia team is starting to come together for the Ashes, packed full of quality. And that's without mentioning, Marnus Labuschagne, who it seems has never dropped out of form the minute he got into Test match cricket. And then Steve Smith, who, if he's now coming back into form, is going to be absolute hell for England to play. And of course, just one last thing on Tim Paine, controversy, I know, with regards to him sledging and the culture. I think it was the pressure of the game, getting to Tim Payne. He is, I think, done a lot of good for the Australian culture and a lot for Australian cricket culture and for that team in general as well, restoring their reputation. I don't think there's any question marks that he will be the wicketkeeper and the captain in the Ashes series come this winter.
Yeah, I echo your thoughts. Obviously, Australia India is very exciting. So obviously, the Boxing Day tests and that sort of Christmas series is very much a tradition in Australian sport, and it's very good to see obviously fans there as well, safely there. Obviously, a little under capacity, but it's very exciting to have that. And yeah, it's I can echo some of your thoughts. I don't know Tim Payne as an Australian cricket fan. I guess Tim Payne. I don't really know who else would come in to lead the team at the moment. I feel like Steve Smith. The Waters kind of.
Can you get Brad Haddin
that kind of move? Yeah, maybe. Ricky Ponting's done a lot of commentary. Maybe he'll fancy a go at this point. But as I said, Green. I mean, you mentioned Green and Pukovsky, very exciting talent. Very excited to see if they get. Obviously, it's a sort of a transition time. Obviously, Dave Warner's sort of edging slowly towards the end of his Test career, and Pukovsky is coming in would be an exciting addition. And it's very interesting to see how the series kind of comes to an end. I think there's one more test if I'm right. So still got a bit of action to go, but very exciting nonetheless. And yes, so as we said, England, Sri Lanka starts tomorrow. I can be sure maybe in the future Raw Sport Weekly will be. I don't know exactly what the time span is, but we'll have a look back at one, if not both tests, depending on timings and whatever, and obviously look ahead at India. Right. So Cam, you're going to stick with me because we're going to bring on someone who is not the biggest cricket enthusiast, but he is an enthusiast of most sports. Joe Spagnoli joins us, and you're muted. So just.
The difference is between us, Josh, is that when I'm muted, I don't speak and leave it up to every other guest to tell me that I am muted. I sort it out before I open my mouth. Happy New Year, everyone.
And Happy New Year to you, Joe. I guess we will talk about one of your big sporting loves, and when it's not football, it tends to be Formula One. And again, there's not been a huge amount of news since our last sort of stream, that sort of awards stream, which you can still catch on the channel to see what myself and not myself, I didn't vote, but these two guys and others voted, how they voted for the 2020 season. But 2021 season coming up, and in fact pushed back a little bit, as it was announced recently that Bahrain will kick off the 2021 calendar on 26th to the 28th of March. That weekend, Australia, the Albert Park circuit that normally kicks it off, will be moved to November from March. And as well as that, we had Portimao, and Portimao is expected to be to join the calendar. Obviously, no confirmation yet. Imola, however, has been confirmed to be on the calendar as well. I will work to get a graphic of the calendar up for people to see in case they just, if you just heard my voice and heard the listing and sort of forgot details here or there, I'll get the graphic up in just a bit. But Joe, let's start with the fact that Australia's been moved back to November. We are starting in Bahrain. Obviously, this is a global health issue. We can't tell when it's going to be safe for teams to kind of travel around the world again. And obviously Australia's got stricter quarantine rules than most other countries as well. And you see it with the Australian Open as well. The tennis players also have that sort of dilemma as well. When can we enter the country in quarantine and whatnot? So it feels like a sensible move to push back Melbourne, or does it not? Or do you feel like this was made maybe too early, given that there's still 2 months until the season opener, in theory?
A sensible and completely expected decision by the government of Victoria. It was the Victorian Premier last year who put out that famous "Get on the Beers" speech, which ended up becoming an internet meme. I don't think many of us would have expected the Australian Grand Prix to kick off the season at the normal date. Bahrain taking over. We had 2 races there last year. Both of them were crackers. I actually really love that track. And you've also got to remember that Australia, as necessary as it is on the calendar, as a season opener, it's actually kind of isolated, irrespective of what the next Grand Prix is going to be. You have to travel literally thousands of miles from Albert Park to wherever you're then going. So in terms of the traveling culture, it actually makes an awful lot of sense. It means that, as with many Grand Prix last year, having the track at an unexpected point in the calendar year, different temperatures, different air pressures, etc., the race becomes incredibly unpredictable, which, although I love the Albert Park circuit, it has been a bit of a procession in recent years, what with it being first race on the calendar, teams being a little bit tepid. So yeah, completely unsurprising that it got delayed. What's more worrying is that the Chinese Grand Prix at Shanghai has rather expectedly also been delayed, but there is no rumored date that that's going to be reintroduced to the calendar. So much like the Vietnamese Grand Prix, which I don't think is ever going to happen, quite frankly, there's a good chance that we'll miss out on the Chinese Grand Prix this year, which has some pretty major financial ramifications. But of all the places to start the season, Bahrain's hosted a season opener before. I actually really like the track. We had 2 great races there last year. Season's not been delayed by too much, so let's keep positive.
Yes. Oh, and let me see if I can get this graphic up now. I should have it. There we go. So there we go. That's the tweet from the official Formula One Twitter account. So as we said, Sakia starts, Imola number 2. We expect Portimao to be number 3, and then normal service with, as you said, China being a bit of a question mark at the moment, and Australia sandwiched in between Brazil and the new Saudi Arabia track, also even Grand Prix even. Cam, I mean, we the season started in Bahrain. It's great, and then what's even better, we get to go down to 2 tracks that proved to be, I suppose, fan favorites really in Imola and Portimao. It's great that those tracks get a second chance at the calendar and maybe stake their claim for a regular spot in the long term.
If you said to me, put 2 tracks on the calendar from that we went to last season here again, Portimao would definitely have been on there. It's a fantastic track. The racing on that track was fun. It was some of the best racing we'd seen all season at Portimao. So even though it's not confirmed at the moment, I think it's almost expected that we're going to go to Portimao on the 2nd of May. That I'm really looking forward to. Imola, I think, carries a lot of nostalgia and a lot of heritage about it. And I think having had the race back there last year, we're almost going back to what we used to have with Imola, which was that late April race, that first race of the European season. But they've really a lot of changes to the track that we saw last year and updating the facilities there. Yes, it's quite narrow. Yes, there were concerns over racing, but actually the race turned out, I think, to be a lot better than a lot of people were expecting, in terms of the fact that there were some fantastic overtaking opportunities. Danny Kvyat's moved up to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, up to I don't think it's Variante Bassa up the top, just before, at the top of the hill before Aqua Minerale. I'm learning that track. But yeah, that was just showed that it is possible to overtake at Imola and have good racing there. So 2 fantastic tracks to have back on the calendar. I think the only thing I would say with all of these races coming on is that there is a real risk, and we saw teams obviously manage to cope with the triple headers this season, but you've got practically 3 straight triple headers after the summer break. You're going to have a lot more. If you put China in as well, that's going to make it even more complicated. I don't know whether Formula One may have to look at that end of the season and say, right, these last 12 races, we need to spread them out. Are we going to have to cancel the summer break maybe, or maybe have a 3-week break just so we've got more space in the calendar? But I think certainly what Formula One's done at the moment, I think they have made the correct decisions to try and get the show on the road, to keep travel as local as possible. I think that's the most important thing. Those first 6 races are all within a few hours flying time of each other. It's very easy to get to and from.
Yeah, I mean, the exception to, I guess, that being Canada, smack bang in the European middle, I guess, is Canada, and that may move, that may not. And yeah, again, it's maybe this is me looking at the COVID responses of several countries, but the US, I could see that getting pushed back a little bit. Austin in October. I don't know if we're going to be ready for the US at least. And maybe even Brazil gets pushed back a little bit as well. So I mean, a lot of these are subject to change, and indeed Brazil has been, the dates with that was slightly altered as the tweet indicates. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I'll ask this question to both of you. Joe, I'll start with Joe. How optimistic are you that we get this full calendar? I mean, obviously I imagine you expect there will be changes here or there as events go on. But how optimistic are you that we get 23 races in 2021?
I would have been pretty pessimistic about the chances of having 23 races without a COVID-19 pandemic, such as the absolute mess around Grand Prix like Vietnam, reserve Grand Prix coming in and out, financial issues for various of the venues on here, not least Barcelona, which is somehow still on the calendar despite those issues. But honestly, as for the reasons that Cam has said, for, mechanic and team welfare, I'm honestly not completely against losing a few of these races. We managed to get 17 out of last season, and that was pretty damn intensive, albeit exciting. So I don't think we're going to have the full 23. However, as we discovered last year, F1 has a tendency to surprise us, and if we ended up with 23, 24, 25, including reserve races, I wouldn't be surprised. Either way, I think we're going to have a good season, so I don't really mind too much.
Cam, do you want to weigh in on the likelihood of getting a full season out of this calendar?
The most at-risk races that I don't think we've mentioned yet is that block from Monaco, Azerbaijan into Canada, just because of the fact it's street circuits. Street circuits are already a lot harder to run Grand Prix on, let alone during a pandemic where you need the ability to be able to have as much access to streets as possible, whether that be transporting patients, transporting essential goods, particularly with vaccinations as well. I'm not sure governments would be happy if the Grand Prix got in the way of vaccinations. So I think they're potentially at risk. I think those three races, which is a shame. Obviously, Monaco is a bit of a procession, but it is the prestige. I'm certainly not going to be as prestigious a Grand Prix with all the stars going to Monaco like we normally get. So I don't know if that would just completely ruin the atmosphere. But Azerbaijan and Canada, two tracks I really like, and I do hope are on the calendar this season. But yeah, echoing what Joe said as well, that period at the end of the season, obviously a lot of it depends on the COVID situation in the US and Brazil in particular. But I don't mind losing some of these tracks at the end of the season, perhaps putting in some of the reserve races as well if Formula One decides that it needs to stay more local. There's a lot of fantastic tracks that just simply aren't on the calendar, haven't had a look in, the likes of Hockenheim, Kyalami, perhaps, if South Africa can sort out its COVID situation, a bit of a pipe dream there, perhaps a return to Sepang. I mean, there's a lot of options if some of these tracks fall off, including flyaway races that you could fit in logistically. But I think to run 23 races in a normal season, I don't know if it takes away the value of the season having too many races. I think if there's an issue with welfare as well, I think, as Joe said, in a normal season, I think 23 is just too much.
Fair enough. Well, we'll see what happens with that. Got some smaller news stories that maybe don't sort of will not kind of have an impact, at least for now, or maybe a bit to the future. But also some that may affect the season. And we start with Renault. I mean, Cyril, and I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, so Joe, just be at the ready. Cyril Abiteboul?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay, Cyril Abiteboul. And he's probably woken up in a cold sweat, realizing I've butchered it. But he's left the team formerly known as Renault, will now be known as Alpine. With and obviously, Fernando Alonso now joins the team. Daniel Ricciardo's off to McLaren, as we've kind of said on numerous times before the show. Is this a big change, or does this change little? Joe, I'll start with you.
To be honest, it came out of the blue for me. There's been criticism of Cyril Abiteboul for a few years. However, I don't really know if it's fair to say Renault got better or worse last year. It seemed like they had a real run of momentum in the middle part of the season where they were being run incredibly well. They did a really good job bringing back Esteban Ocon, who I thought was pretty poor at the start of the season, ended up getting a lot better. Maybe the French link and the man management of Abiteboul and Ocon together was the key component there. I'm pretty pessimistic about their ability to resuscitate Fernando Alonso, but that's besides the point. if you're gonna, I don't know. I'm not entirely surprised that he's gone. He's far from the favourite Formula One team principal on the grid. But if you were gonna ask me to predict who would win the sack race if there was one in 2021, I wouldn't have put my money on Cyril Abiteboul. Much though I love the guy, I would have been willing to bet this microphone at least on Mattia Binotto getting kicked out by Ferrari.
Yeah, and actually, I've decided I'm going to steal a segment from one of my favorite basketball pundit shows to watch, The Jump from ESPN. They have a segment called Something, Nothing, or Everything, and I feel like we can use that for these stories. So, Joe, for Cyril Abiteboul's departure, are you saying it's something, or was that nothing? I couldn't tell.
What in terms of the size of the story? Because if
in like its impact on Alpine, the impact of his departure, is it something to be monitor? Is it everything for Alpine, or is it nothing? Will it mean nothing?
Car's basically the same as it was last year, except painted blue. They've got a new driver who hasn't really raced apart from the young drivers test at the end of last year. I'd say it would be a much bigger story if it was halfway through the season.
Okay, Cam, what about you? Do you reckon this is his departure's big news? Is it something, or is it nothing to worry about majorly?
I think the bigger news is not Abiteboul. The bigger news is who they brought in instead, and that's David Brivio. Autosport did a fantastic video on this. The impact that David Brivio has had within MotoGP. Seriously recommend you go have a look at that to really encompass just how much of an impact David Brivio has had, not just on the careers of the likes of Valentino Rossi, arguably the greatest motorcycle rider of all time, but also in recent years, the way he took Suzuki from a team that was just sort of languishing in the midfield within MotoGP, and the way his man management in terms of getting a team working together, bringing together both its engineering department in Japan, but also the race team in Italy. A challenge that could, be similar here, as they said on Autosport. Renault is split between the engine operation in France and the team in Enstone. You've also got his ability to manage drivers, particularly young talent. And obviously, Fernando Alonso is going to be an interesting one because he's not exactly young. Well, he's not young. And he is quite a volatile figure. And I don't know if Brivio coming in may push Fernando out. If Brivio, as we expect, will take control of the team and really move it in his direction. If Mercedes don't bring Ocon back into the fold, which was George Russell emerging now, unless he becomes a second driver to Russell in 22, I'm not sure he will. And with Renault's young talent as well, there's a lot of drivers in there, Guan Yu Zhou, Christian Lundgaard, drivers with a lot of potential that need to be driven forward. And I think that's where Brivio is looking. Go check that video out if you want to really see just how much of an impact Brivio could have. I'm going to say it's something, not because of Abiteboul, but because of Brivio.
Interesting. And we'll see what his impact is in the paddock when the Grand Prix all kind of start. So that'll be interesting to watch, and his dynamic as well with Alonso, who has been promised that this car will be competitive. So that will be, a few bad results to start the season, and things could go downhill very quickly. Alpine downhill. That will be the pun that I make throughout this time. There was a story a week ago that Williams were going to use Mercedes gearboxes from 2022. Obviously they've been powered. They have, been powered by Mercedes engines since 2014. Now the gearbox now joins the party and kind of makes Williams a kind of more aligned to Mercedes as opposed to their independence. So Joe, again, same question, but I guess you've got two perspectives here. For Williams and for the wider Formula One sport, is Williams' gearbox deal something, nothing, or everything?
Obviously it speaks an awful lot of Dornier Den Capital taking over the team as opposed to the Williams family, the end of the last of the great independents who, to be honest, have made some pretty terrible decisions over the last 20 years or so. So I don't think it's particularly unexpected. I would have wholly expected, especially in these financial circumstances, that Williams would go down, shall we say, the Racing Point route and taking some homologated parts from Mercedes. So yeah, far from a surprise. Williams under Dornier Den Capital are sacrificing a little bit of their independence to be more competitive. With the financial stakes as high as they are, I completely understand why they're doing it. I certainly don't think the drivers, Latifi and Russell especially, are going to, I don't think they're going to complain about it. It's not a particularly big story. I'm just hoping that Williams can continue their positive momentum through the grid, independent or not.
Yeah, Cam, any thoughts on this gearbox deal? Is it a big deal, or is it, again, as Joe said, not going to matter too much?
I don't think there's much more I can add to what Joe was saying, to be honest. This is obviously Williams, I think, being pragmatic with the situation they got at the moment. Obviously, potentially losing George Russell at the end of next season to Mercedes. Perhaps this is a way to keep the Mercedes links going. And yeah, I think it is just a reflection of where we are in Formula One at the moment, where you are either, a big works team, or you are becoming a factory team there now. I mean, the only real exception as a manufacturer all on its own is McLaren, but in many ways, it's been using Renault engines in the last few seasons, now going over to Mercedes. There's not real independence in that sense. So I think that it'll be interesting to see whether I don't think I can add to anything that Joe said. I think Williams is starting to move towards this more pragmatic operation, like many other teams, like Racing Point. I think the only thing we could say as well, if there are new teams coming, will it be independent constructors, manufacturers, the likes of BMW? I mean, that will be an interesting one. But I mean, from that regards, yeah, it's something, but it's not mega. It's not everything.
Yeah, fair enough. The last one's not news, but it's news that I'm surprised we haven't got yet. And that's Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes signing a new contract. It hasn't happened yet, and yet we all expect it to happen. It's a formality, at least in principle, it's a formality. And yet, explicitly, we haven't had confirmation from driver or team that the deal's been signed. We've had sort of verbal assurances from Toto Wolff that the deal will happen. Lewis has made it clear. By the way, congratulations to Lewis Hamilton from us for winning Sports Personality of the Year for 2020. He's sort of hinted that he'll probably commit to Mercedes, but it hasn't happened yet. And I'm surprised it's, we're close to 2 months before the season, and it still hasn't kind of been signed and on paper, or at least we don't, maybe it has been behind closed doors. We don't know, but it's not been announced yet. So Joe, is there something in that, or is that just, is that just looking for a story where there isn't?
There's still a while to go before the season starts. However, I'd say it becomes more of a something as time goes by, with the exception of a late call up for Russell to replace him if, for whatever reason, Hamilton left. I don't really see anyone else stepping into that Mercedes fold. They're certainly not going to promote Stoffel Van Dorn or Nico Hülkenberg at last minute. So hardly a surprise. I mean, there are some people arguing that if Hamilton's holding out for more money, kind of doing to bring in the arts into this, the Daniel Craig route of not signing a deal for the new James Bond film until the studio literally offered him a blank check and whatever he wanted. People are saying, well, if Russell was able to do as well at Sakir, why can't Hamilton take a pay cut, or why is he demanding so much? The answer to which is pretty simple. George Russell would get Mercedes a bit in sponsorship. Lewis Hamilton in sponsorship alone probably brings Mercedes at least 4 times what they pay him every single year with his links to Monster Energy, among other massive companies that profit off of his brand. So again, I suspect it's maybe just a case of Hamilton holding out for more money in what could well be his last season in Formula One. We still don't know that. But also bear in mind, final point, Hamilton's got one hell of a busy year ahead of him, 23 races or not. He's got the team that he's managing over in Extreme E, which is a cause he's very passionate about, electric cars, and he's going to want to do well because he's Lewis Hamilton. He's very competitive. He's one of the greatest drivers of all time for that reason. It's not completely out of the realms of possibility that he retires, but again, I think in terms of your basketball scale, Josh, this is a very low something. I fully expect him to sign a deal, irrespective of how much he earns.
Yeah, Cam, I'll turn to you. I'll ask, I'll give you the same question, really. Is there a story in this? But it's interesting because, Hamilton, as you said, off track, he's got a lot of business interests, but also, he's also raised his sort of profile in terms of, being a prominent figure in terms of Black Lives Matter and campaigning for that in Formula One, and sort of raised his public profile through that as well. So it's not like he needs more it's not, again, it seems to be purely either financial incentive or maybe just, him being pretty much done with the sport. I have no idea because he's achieved so much already. So, but anyway, I'll turn it to you, Cam. What do you reckon the fact that we still haven't had any confirmation that Hamilton's re-signed with Mercedes just yet.
It's a nothing, this story, to me. I fully expect Lewis Hamilton to sign on. I feel this is just him negotiating because, as Joe said, he knows his worth. Lewis Hamilton knows not just what he brings on the track, which, he's one of the greatest drivers of all time. You know your value in that regards, but also off track as well. It's not just the sponsorship, the political activism, and really the public spotlight that he gives Mercedes. But when he talks about things like, one of the things we believe is holding him up, Lewis Hamilton wanting to be involved in the electric program in Mercedes and wanting one of those cars, for example. Now, it's interesting Lewis Hamilton spent a lot of 2020 saying that, in the current situation we are with the pandemic, that, it shouldn't be right for him to take, ask for more pay because that's, it's not fair when a lot of other people are losing their jobs. So I think it'd be interesting if a bit of a reversal almost on that, which I think would be disappointing. But if that is the case, but certainly if it's Lewis Hamilton knowing his worth and just really negotiating football, look, I bring you a lot, get me involved in X and X and X part of the company. I almost feel Lewis Hamilton's trying to integrate himself more into the Mercedes, into the Daimler operation. It seems that the opposition or the sort of resistance is coming from Daimler at the moment. The Daimler sort of, I think, run a lot more sort of the general overall Mercedes brand falls within Daimler. And I think they're key. I think they, having seen George Russell, I think are keen to see him get in that car at some point. But Lewis Hamilton knows his value. I fully expect him to sign on, at least for this season, maybe even for 2022 as well. I think he's just holding out for the right terms. I don't necessarily think it is the money necessarily. I'd hope that given what he did say in 2020, it's not the money and it's his involvement in other projects that he wants to put himself in and almost build a legacy within Mercedes, the way that Michael Schumacher did. In the end of his days at Ferraris, he stayed on as an advisor. He integrated himself into the team. I can almost see Lewis Hamilton wanting to do that with Mercedes.
Yeah, it's. I'm with you too. I expect this deal to kind of be signed, and maybe it is signed, and just I don't know. The PR department's had a bit of a long break and not decided to announce it yet. I don't know. But it does feel strange that we still haven't had any explicit confirmation that it's happened. So anyway, we'll see. I mean, we'll see what happens in a couple months' time. But yeah, I feel like that's it in terms of sporting news. Obviously, the NFL playoffs are happening. There's a lot going on there, so there's a lot of news from that. NBA obviously also being hit by COVID quite badly. So a lot of stuff like that, which you can find out by following our Instagram page on the ticker. We put as many updates as we can on our story. You can check out the news from across the sporting landscape. But for now, and don't forget on Saturday we have our Cron stream as well. We'll talk about football, the uneventful transfer window. I mean, goodness me, we might be talking about Sebastian Haller, Charlie Austin, and Timothy Fosu-Mensah as the three biggest moves of the window. That's how barren it's been. But we'll also talk about some of the results that's happened. Obviously, we won't look back too far, but we'll have a look at some of the results that's happened. Man United winning the league, maybe. I don't know. That's something we will probably have a look at, as well as previewing some of the games that are coming up this week even, in this kind of chaotic and packed schedule. But thank you to both my guests. Thank you to Joe Spagnoli for his input with the F1. Thank you to Cam Hall with his expertise on the cricket and as well as the Formula One. We will be back on Saturday, so tune in.